Okay, we are back on the record at 12:57 p.m. This marks the beginning of media number 2.
Okay, Mr. SCHREURS, just returned from lunch, and are you still feeling well enough for your deposition to continue?
Yes.
Okay. And while we were off the record, we marked as next in order Exhibit 47, which is Bates stamped PPT 890 through 893. You have that document in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. If you would turn to the back page of that one, 893. Have you read that email?
Not yet.
Okay. Have you had a chance to read the email on 893?
Yes.
Okay. Now that email appears to be directed to, well, the date of it is on the previous page, 892, and it's from Bob Fossner. It's dated December 26, 2007 at 2:36 p.m. And it looks like it's to Jean Gish, who's oldie nurse.
That's Norma.
Norma, okay.
Yeah.
And Dave Beeling, correct?
Yes.
And Dawn Utterback.
Yes.
And then Cynthia SCHREURS.
Correct.
That's your wife, right?
Correct.
And Tom Fear.
Correct.
By the way, do you and your wife share an email?
Most of the times we don't. I do have my own email address.
Okay, so I noticed sometimes there would be things coming from Cynthia SCHREURS' email address, but then you would sign, right?
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
on her computer, then I'll go otherwise.
Okay. Do you recall receiving this particular email?
I remember receiving something like this, yes.
Okay. Do you know where it starts with saying, "I'm proposing we send the enclosed letter." Do you know whether there was an attachment with this email?
No,
Okay. And so I guess you wouldn't know where that is.
no. I'm sure it was a letter that he was sending to Verna and both to Verna and Nancy.
No, actually if you read the email,
Mm-hmm.
he's referring to a proposed letter to Nancy McElwain's attorney.
Oh, no, I have not seen the letter.
Okay. So do you remember Bob Fossner proposing a conciliatory letter to send to Nancy's attorney?
No.
Okay. So I guess you wouldn't know whether a conciliatory letter ever went out then?
No.
So in this email, Mr. Fossner says, our attorney, Mr. Fear, has pointed out that the association cannot get a restraining order, that only individuals can get one, and probably only if there is some threat of physical violence. So I have been struggling to think of what to do to try to resolve the situation we find ourselves in. Unless anyone else has a better suggestion, this letter is an attempt to state our position of conciliation and reconciliation and try to do something to get him out of his angry, hostile rut. And that's referring to Patrick McAlane, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, do you recall responding to that email?
I remember responding to the email.
Okay, so if you look at the email that starts on page 891 and
Right.
ends on page 892, did you have a chance to read that one?
Okay.
Okay. So it looks from the dates here that this is a response to the email of December 26, 2007 from Bob Fossner, that you're responding to that email. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it looks like you did, in fact, read the proposed conciliatory letter, at least at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
I don't remember what it said exactly, but I do remember seeing something.
Okay. And you saying in this email that that letter discusses at length some letter from a Mr. Gavin. Did you understand Nancy McAlane's attorney at that time to be Mr. Gavin?
No.
No? So who are you referring to when you say a letter from Mr. Gavin?
Well, that's who the letter, I'm sure, was addressed to. It was Mr. Gavin. I probably saw the letter. I don't recall right now the specifics of the letter.
Okay, so you probably saw the proposed conciliatory letter that Bob Fossner had written.
Yes.
But you hadn't seen some letter that came from a Mr. Gavin that apparently Fossner was referring to. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay. Now, I haven't seen this proposed conciliatory letter either, so you don't know why it hasn't been produced?
No.
Okay. You were against sending out a conciliatory letter, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you knew by this time that Patrick McAlane had a mental health issue?
No.
Okay.
Never.
So do you, as you sit here today, believe that Patrick McAlane has a mental health issue?
Absolutely not. I think he has anger issues. I think he has severe anger issues. I think he is very spoiled and does not like anybody in authority, because every person that he attacks in the building is someone in authority. As soon as they get on the board, they're a target.
So you don't think that his diagnosis is correct?
No.
Objection, calls for expert opinion.
Okay.
I'd like you to answer the questions
Yes.
that she's asking.
Yes.
By the way, in this email dated, and it says it's from Cynthia SCHREURS, but you signed it, right?
Yes.
Okay. This email dated December 28th, 2007, 11:37 a.m. You're including people in this email that the original one didn't go to.
Correct.
Okay. And why is David Beeling in on this?
Dave Beeling is the property manager,
Okay.
and he should be aware of what's going on.
Okay. Did he give you advice in this regard?
Dave Beeling?
Right.
Never.
Did he give the board advice?
He may have, don't know.
Okay, excuse me. This issue wasn't about accounting, was it?
No.
Okay, if you look at the top email there from Dave Beeling to you, or to your wife, it's dated December 28th, 2007 at 1:50 p.m. And he says, Joe, here's another copy for you. As I understand it, a corporation cannot get a restraining order. You as an individual can. It makes sense in that how can someone avoid a corporation? You cannot keep him from his own property, but you can keep him distanced from you, a person. Do you recall receiving that email?
Yes.
And you recall him saying, hope your new year brings better health, less aggravation, and a whole lot less of dickhead?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Was he referring to Patrick Mackerling?
I hope so. He wasn't talking about my wife.
Now, why were you opposed to the board sending this conciliatory letter?
It wouldn't have changed anything. It may have changed a few things with some of the people in there, but it wouldn't have changed anything with me. He is angry at me. Always has been and always will continue to be.
And so this was about the fact that it was causing you physical stress.
Yes.
If you turn to the first page of this Exhibit 47, page 890, did you get a chance to read that email? Let me know when you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you wrote this email, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it comes from your wife's email address, but it was signed by you?
Yes.
Okay. And if you look at that second paragraph, at this point you were wanting the board to get aggressive with Patrick, right?
Correct.
And you were wanting them to get restraining orders?
Get restraining orders or invoke the CCNRs regarding a nuisance.
Well, you say corporations may not be able to get restraining orders, but they are responsible to protect employees and corporate officers. So if Patrick is scaring the building managers and board members, the HOA corporation is responsible to protect these individuals, including obtaining restraining orders on their behalf. So you weren't a corporate officer or on the board at that time, right?
No.
So you were wanting them to get restraining orders for the board or for employees?
Yes.
And you said, I think Patrick is getting worse because no one challenges him or makes him accountable for his behavior, and if we start being aggressive back, he may go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted Patrick to go away, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if you look at the third paragraph, you say, while I served on the board, are you referring to serving on the board at Park Plaza?
Yes.
Okay, and you say you had problems with a paranoid schizophrenic granddaughter of a resident and another problem with another resident's caretaker who was obviously mentally ill, and who kept bringing her paranoid schizophrenic son along with her, parens, who stood outside the front door and started fires, close parens. And you say, I was diligent in confronting these problematic people,
Right.
telling them to leave, assisting one resident in obtaining a restraining order, and in calling the cops. As a result, they all went away within a month to 6 weeks, and we have never been bothered by any of them again. You wrote that, right?
Correct.
And so you were telling the manager of Park Plaza that you had been successful in the past at forcing mentally ill people out of Park Plaza. Is that right?
Totally
No.
mischaracterizes what is being said. The document speaks for itself.
Did you, in fact, force a paranoid schizophrenic out of Park Plaza?
Objection, same objection.
Tell me what you mean by that.
The granddaughter from Mrs. Sloss, I'm sorry, S-L-O-S-S, S-C-H-L-O-S-S. I received a call from Mrs. Sloss, and we have a Mrs. Sloss in the building, but her name is actually Sloss. And so she called up crying and needed my help. So I went up there. When I got there, Mrs. Sloss was laying on the floor. She had hand grips on her arms that were purple. She had one around her throat that was already purple and a black eye. At which point I got her into bed and I contacted the police department. The police department came and Mrs. Sloss told them that she had gone ahead and taken and forced her to sign a $5,000 check. I stood
I'm sorry, that who had?
that the granddaughter had forcibly taken a check and made Mrs. Sloss sign for $5,000 check made payable to the granddaughter. The police showed up. They looked in her purse, and there was the check. And it wasn't for $5,000, it was for $10,000. And so while the police were coming, she was talking into the control unit, which controls your electrical and your heating system. And she was talking to the priest across the street who had raped her, according to her. And so I knew there was a problem, but I'm hoping the police were going to be here soon. And they showed up, and then they took her away. And we were able to complete a restraining order and keep the granddaughter away from the grandmother.
And how did you know that that granddaughter was paranoid schizophrenic?
That's what the grandmother had said.
Okay. And so you, as the board president, decided to help her get a restraining order?
Objection, may misstate prior testimony. I believe you resigned as board president.
No, he says, while I served on the board.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, this was prior to December.
Gotcha.
And yes,
Okay. And then the second incident that you refer to about a paranoid schizophrenic son, that you were diligent in getting out of the building?
yes.
Okay. And why are you equating those with Patrick McErlane?
Because we had problems, and you can get rid of problems by confronting them.
Okay. In fact, you present a formula there of telling them to leave, diligently calling the police, and getting restraining orders,
Yes.
right? Okay. And you say that they all went away within a month to 6 weeks, and we've never been bothered by any of them again, right?
Correct.
So were you presenting this to David Beeling as the way you wanted them to approach getting rid of Patrick McErlane?
Yes.
And you were saying we should do this instead of a conciliatory letter.
Well, the conciliatory letter wouldn't have worked.
Okay.
It may have worked for whoever handed it to him, but it wouldn't have worked for anybody else.
And do you know if David Beeling felt the same way that you did?
I don't know what David Beeling feels.
In that last paragraph, you are saying that you and Cynthia think that David Beeling should get the opportunity to provide the on-site manager at Park Plaza, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So were you telling him that you'll promote that idea if he goes along with you and backs you on this plan of getting rid of Patrick McErlane?
Nope. The reason we hired David Beeling in the beginning was because we needed to get rid of Franciscan property. A very inept company, and they couldn't handle our size condominium. Dave Beeling, however, can. We wanted a full service manager. He would provide the maintenance manager, he would provide the cleaning, he would provide all services, including maintaining and keeping up on our CC&Rs, etc.
That reminds me, at one time he proposed that he's the one who should employ the on-site manager, even when it was possibly going to be Patrick, right?
Yes.
Okay, and he thought that that would be the best arrangement?
That was proposed by Bob Foster.
Okay. And at this time, this is almost a year later, what was it that Beeling was doing? He wasn't employing the on-site manager?
No.
Okay. And so somebody on the board felt that that wasn't the way to go about it?
Objection calls for speculation.
Yeah. I don't know, what they
Okay.
what they felt.
Okay. Do you know what the board did decide to do as far as whether to send the conciliatory letter or whether to follow your plan?
Same objection.
Do you know?
Oh, I don't know if they even sent it.
Okay. Let me mark next in order PPT 764 through 769. Better put the exhibit tag on there.
Sorry.
$48. Now, this is a letter that is signed by your wife and addressed to Donna Horwitz. Are you familiar with this letter?
Yes.
Okay, and did your wife write this on behalf of you and her?
Yes.
Okay. So this is August 5th of 2009. By this time, were you and your wife frustrated with the board's approach to Patrick McErlane?
Yes.
Okay. And this letter, which is written on your wife's legal letterhead, is your formal demand made to the board, correct?
Correct.
By the way, what kind of attorney is your wife?
She's a wills, trust, and probate attorney.
Okay. And does she practice in San Mateo County?
Yes.
How long has she been practicing?
17 years.
And she's still active?
Yes. She was a former law professor
Where?
at San Francisco Law School,
Do you know what she taught?
UCC.
Did she ever, in her practice that you know of, work in getting restraining orders?
No.
Why was it that you and your
Actually,
wife...
yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
She had to get a few from some beneficiaries that were not thrilled that they received what they received. And we had several threats. And so one showed up and was escorted out by the police. And so we decided to get a restraining order.
So she had gotten restraining orders to protect herself from those people?
Protect ourselves and the employees at the time.
Okay. So in this letter in August of 2009, you didn't have restraining orders yet, right?
No, not until September.
Okay. So I'm curious, why did you not get restraining orders during 2007, 2008, or the first half of 2009?
Well, because we had so many different people tell us that there's no way that you're going to ever get a restraining order in a condominium. And we talked to George Corey, we talked to a couple of other attorneys at the time, and every one of them told us it would cost us between $50,000 and $60,000 to get a restraining order.
Is that why you were trying to get the association to do it?
Under the CC&Rs, under the nuisance portion of the CC&Rs.
Was that so that it would be the association spending the money?
Well, the association, we had an attorney on retainer, and they could have easily have applied for one.
At any rate, at this point, it sounds like you and your wife were frustrated at what the board had done to date, correct?
What they haven't done to
Right.
date.
Okay. And if you look at page 766, she underlines in the letter that she's requesting that the association board take the following actions immediately or provide me with good reason in writing by Wednesday, August 12, 2009, as to why the board will not take such action. And then she outlines 4 things, right?
Yes.
And so she gave the board a deadline to, for one thing, to call Sergeant Jim Ford at the Burlingame Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
And she says this may result in the board contacting the county DA's office to have them file a TRO against Patrick, right?
Correct.
And then she says that she wants a detailed log of Patrick's actions provided.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Document speaks for
Document.
itself, argumentative.
And she said she spent 4 hours filling out restraining order forms for 5 people, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall her doing that?
Yes.
Do you know what 5 people she filled out restraining order forms for?
Norma, Behringer Salz, there was Al Mokri, Tim Ho, and
Andrea DeGraff?
no. There was a caregiver, and I don't recall her name.
Okay. And it also says that she wants Kimberly Gott notified, right?
Yes.
And that she's demanding that the board hire a San Mateo County attorney and have that attorney file a lawsuit to remove Patrick from the building, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in response to this letter, do you know if the board started to follow those actions?
I don't think the board did, no.
Okay. That you and your wife did get restraining orders in September of 2009, right?
Correct.
Once you got the restraining orders, did you call the police and report violations a number of times?
Yes.
Do you remember how often? Or how many times, I should say?
18.
18 times?
18. I believe the reports are in that stack.
Did you report things even when you weren't feeling threatened?
I've never reported anything that I wasn't being threatened.
Okay. So for instance, when someone other than Patrick Mackerlane named Polly Baugh parked Patrick's or Nancy's car in a space next to yours, you called the police?
It's a violation of the restraining order.
Okay. And did you know that your wife called the police when Patrick and Nancy went to a golf course restaurant and sat down to eat?
It was a violation of the restraining order.
Okay. Were you there?
No,
Okay. So you didn't feel threatened by that incident, right?
not myself.
Was that, who filed the restraining order? Was that
Cynthia.
report?
Cynthia filed a restraining order
Yeah, so,
with San Mateo.
And did you encourage the other holders of restraining orders to call the police as often as possible?
Nope, they did it on their own.
Were you aware that your wife told, well, first of all, who's Norma Berliner Sauls?
She lives on the 5th floor.
Was she on the board in 2009?
Yes,
Okay. And did you know that Norma Berliner Sauls thought that Patrick was mentally sick?
objection calls for speculation.
I'm asking what you knew.
You're asking. Do you know that she knows?
I'm not sure if she knows.
Okay, didn't she tell you?
She was a nurse.
Right, and she told you that she thought that Patrick had a psychological problem, right?
I don't recall her telling me that he had a psychological problem. She told me he was an angry young man.
Did you know that your wife told Norma Berliner Sauls not to call Patrick mentally sick because that would give him legal rights?
No. She may have said that so that you don't put a label on someone unless you know what.
Well, in fact, she says, I will caution you to stick to the facts of the event and how it made you feel, and avoid diagnosing Patrick as psychologically ill. In fact, don't discuss it. Insanity is a defense to a crime. Patrick is not insane. He's a mean, vindictive bully with a huge chip on his shoulder and malice in his heart. Did you ever read that email?
No, but it
Okay.
sounds pretty good.
Did you know Norma Berliner Sauls was a nurse for a long time?
I just told you,
Do you know how long she was a nurse?
27 years. Pediatric nurse.
Okay, if you would look at the document Bates stamped 122 and 123. I'm going to mark that one next in order.
You know, Sharon, it's probably easier if you do this since you prepared for this deposition and probably know the documents a lot more than Joe does.
Okay, there's not many left.
I did the same thing every time I've taken any deposition. I think it's a common courtesy.
This is number 49.
Let's let her do that. It's her deposition, okay?
Okay, so you're looking at the document that's been marked Exhibit 49, which is another email string, starting with the bottom one from ADG 621 to Cynthia SCHREURS, and then the top one from Cynthia SCHREURS to ADG 621, and signed by Joe and Cynthia SCHREURS. Let me know when you've had a chance to read those.
Where do you get an ADD?
Oh, her
This is
email
the
address.
Andrea
Oh,
DeGrasse.
Andy DeGrasse. Okay, this one here. Okay.
Okay, so this is now in 2011, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall receiving this email from Andrea DeGraff?
No, my wife did.
Okay, but you responded?
Yes.
Okay. And the email in, well, first of all, was Andrea DeGraff on the board at this time?
Yes.
Okay. And she says in the bottom email that the board has sat down, had a sit down with Patrick Attorney. I'm sorry, let me start over. She said in the bottom email that the board had a sit down with Patrick and his attorney and gave him the chance to be heard, which was a first. And she's saying that there hasn't been any recent complaints about Patrick, and so they're not at this time doing anything about Patrick. Is that the way you recall that email?
Are we talking about the whole string? I'm sorry. Which one are we
Just
talking
the
about?
bottom one.
The 3-line sentence, or the 3, okay.
No, I'm sorry, I guess it would be the middle.
Okay, can we start over?
Because I'm going,
yeah,
I'm
but-
reading this and
well,
I'm not
Okay.
seeing what you're
Sure.
reading.
Okay, so in the bottom one, you're telling Andrea, why isn't the board doing anything, right?
Cynthia's telling Andrew, why isn't the board doing anything?
Okay. And then in the middle one, Andrea is telling you, well, we had a sit-down meeting and we let Patrick be heard for the first time.
Wait a second.
Correct?
Have you had an opportunity to read this entire string?
No.
Okay, why don't we do that?
What do we,
I'm sorry, I thought you read the whole document.
no, you
Okay.
just handed,
Oh.
she just handed it to me.
Go ahead and read the whole thing. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, I'm just, if you tell me where you're at, if you're on the top one, the middle, or the bottom.
Let's just read the...
We start with
let's
the
just start,
oldest, and then we go.
Okay.
Okay,
in order.
let's just
Okay.
give us a few
Listen,
minutes.
Lee. Okay.
Okay. So in the bottom email, you or your wife are telling Andrea on the board, we thought you were going to consult with an attorney. Why isn't something happening about Patrick, right?
Correct.
And then in the middle email, Andrea DeGraff tells you that they had a sit-down meeting with Patrick and gave him a chance to be heard for the first time, and that they were hoping that since things have died down, that they're not going to need an attorney, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then in the top email, you wrote that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And you're unhappy that the board is not, at this moment, planning to sue Patrick, is that right?
It didn't say sue Patrick
yeah.
anywhere.
Well, it did in
Take action.
in your wife's letter that we had previously marked. So as of 2009, your wife had demanded that they sue Patrick to evict him from the building, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is that
And in,
this?
Yes.
and in 2011, that still hadn't happened, right?
Correct.
Okay. So in this email, you're telling Andrea that even if Patrick hasn't done anything recently, that's just because he tends to have cyclical patterns or something of that effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to mark next in order 496. Oops. Is that 50?
Yes.
Okay, so we're actually marked as Exhibit 50, pages 496 through 500. The first page, 496, is that a letter written by you?
Yes.
And it's written to the District Attorney, Steve Wagstaff?
Yes.
Was he the actual district attorney or an assistant DA or what?
He is the district attorney at
Were you-
that time.
Were you on a first-name basis with him?
I know him as Steve.
How did you happen to know him?
I knew his brother.
Okay, so he was a friend or an acquaintance?
The brother is an acquaintance of ours and a friend, and Steve is his brother.
Had you socialized with Steve Wagstaff?
Other than a social event for the San Mateo County Historical Museum, that's the only time.
Okay. And in this letter, you're trying to get Patrick prosecuted for something, correct?
Violations of restraining order, yes.
Don't you also suggest that that Patrick is targeting elderly people?
Yes, I'm one of them.
And so you're thinking that you might be able to get the district attorney to prosecute him for elder abuse?
Correct. Norma Sauls happens to be 86.
Did you get any result from this letter to Steve Wagstaff?
None.
Were these other pages attached to the letter?
No, this was separate.
So pages 497 to,
There were police reports that we put in there. Oh, yes, and an unsigned OCS,
OSC.
OSC.
Okay, so pages 497 through 500, you had filled out a proposed order to show cause that you wanted the district attorney to issue?
Yes.
Now, in your diary and in various places, restraining order applications, you've accused Patrick of causing property damage at Park Plaza, right?
I have not. Other people have.
Okay, so you're not aware of any property damage that he's caused?
No.
Okay. Did you ever ask the association to also sue Nancy McElwain? Do you know of any damage that Nancy McElwain has caused to Park Plaza?
None.
We're talking about property damage, right?
Do you know of any damage that Nancy McElwain has caused?
Objection vague.
Property damage or any kind of damage that Nancy has caused?
Personal, emotional.
Any kind?
None.
Okay. That's all I have. So I don't know if we're going to skip or Rick. Should we take 5 minutes?
Well, why don't we take 2-3 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, we are off the record at 1:41 p.m. Okay, we are back on the record at 1:47 p.m.
SCHREURS, my name is Robert Howey. I represent Patrick McElwain in this case.
At this point, sir, do you know what this case is about? Do you know what the issues are?
You are filing a lawsuit. Oh, we are
Wait,
filing a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And who you mean by we?
Hmm?
When you said we are filing a lawsuit, who did you mean?
Well, you're filing a lawsuit against my wife and myself in federal court, and your association is filing one against Patrick.
When you said we are filing one, you meant you and the association. Is that a fair statement?
No, I said we being in conglomerate. You're filing a lawsuit.
How does that we, though? You see what I'm getting at? The first person plural?
Okay, forget the we.
Okay.
I don't know
start
why
over.
I'm here. Start over.
Okay, we'll start over. Did I see you at the holiday party at the Park Plaza Towers this year?
Yes.
And you said Semper Fi, I believe. Is that correct? Was that
Correct.
you? Okay, because I wasn't
Correct.
sure I would recognize you.
Correct.
When you were in the military, sir, did you ever serve with the FMF? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
For how long?
Da Nang for 6 months.
Well, as you know, I have a,
And then fortunately, I was able to get out of there.
I would agree. I want you to know up front that I have a tremendous amount of respect for the corpsman that served with the Marine Corps. And I know that you're going to do your best today to testify truthfully and accurately. It's not my intention to embarrass you, but it will be my intention to get at what I believe to be the truth, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I tell this to, I'm not insulting you, I tell this to every witness who is deposed, and that is that the reason we have a deposition is so that we can find out what the truth of the matter is as best we can. But if this ever goes to trial, the jury will see this testimony. And I want the jury to understand that you've been advised that we are relying on you to tell the truth in this matter. If you don't understand a question, you should let me know. Don't answer a question if you don't understand it. Do you get that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What type of medical training did you get to become a corpsman?
When I was in school, in college, I was taking biochemistry. When I had to enlist in the service, because I got my draft notice, I enlisted in the Navy. And then from the Navy, I was given a billet of corpsman.
Did you receive any further training at Montford Point or anywhere?
I received training at Balboa Hospital in triage, dermatology, and also infectious medicine.
Any training? Do you know what a Section 8 is?
Yes.
What is it?
Someone who has a mental capacity that is unable to perform his duties.
Did you receive training? Oh, strike that. How much training did you receive? And describe it for us.
Objection, relevance.
Go ahead, sir.
I spent 6 months in core school, which is an A school, and you learn the basics of the human anatomy. We learned about the differences in medication, adverse reaction to morphine, how to mend a broken bone, how to reset shoulders that sometimes when you're firing a gun you could dislocate your shoulder, and how to put that back into place with minimal damage. We were taught how to dress wounds, how to make sure for head injuries, precautions you need to take, neck injuries, severe cautions that you had to take, had a complete array of things.
Was there any training in what's known as combat fatigue?
No.
Did you ever get called upon by a commanding officer to make an assessment of a Marine for purposes of determining whether he had combat fatigue?
Objection relevant.
No.
What was your exact job in Da Nang?
I was in Da Nang for the first 2 weeks for processing of the deceased. And from there, I wound up going into the infectious medicine, mostly syphilis, gonorrhea, and then, as you know, jungle rot was huge. Any kind of a cut would take a long time to heal or would wind up being infected. So we would do cultures and try to come up with some kind of a antivirus to beat that.
Would it be fair to say from your description that you weren't with the grunts in the field, but rather at a field hospital?
On emergencies, when they needed somebody extra, I went out.
How did you get out there?
Normally by Jeep. They would bring us to a location.
Relevance.
What you indicated you got the Core A training.
Right.
How long did that last?
That lasted that lasted 4 months. And then I went to field med school,
Where was that?
Camp Pendleton.
How long was that?
That was 6 weeks.
And in that 6 weeks, did you receive training on mental assessment?
No.
If we were to go back and examine the curriculum, would you expect that we would find a portion of the curriculum that covered mental assessments?
Not necessarily.
What does that mean?
I don't believe I'd ever seen anything related to mental fatigue.
Okay, I understand that's your testimony. I want to know about the curriculum. Is it in there?
If
we go back and find the curriculum for that school, I want to know whether or not you're...
Yeah.
I think he said he didn't know.
I heard him.
Yeah, I don't believe that it is in there. We were basically taught the simplest things, that what we learned in core school, what we learned. Once I got out of core school, I also spent a year at Balboa Hospital in the emergency room triage, and then went to dermatology research. And then from there, went to Pendleton. So at Pendleton, I know we were mostly concerned with wounds, and that's what we pretty much dealt with.
I understand. Do you recall any of your commanding officers at Pendleton?
At Pendleton, there was a Dr. Grossman, a Dr. Bradley, Captain Carson, and a Lieutenant Commander Green.
These were all people who were in the medical service corps or doctors, correct?
Doctors.
These are not the school people. These are
Doctors.
These are in the, but this is in the FMF assignment.
Right.
To Pendleton.
Right.
Okay. And what years were you at Pendleton?
I was there in 1971.
And just 71
Yeah, July 71
until
until September.
Okay, I ask you what a Section 8 was. Were you ever involved in a Section 8 discharge?
Never.
At this moment, do you have any information about the diagnosis of Patrick McErlane?
No. Other
No.
than what you had said,
Well, other than what?
bipolar.
And did I say that?
Yes.
Okay. You have no information from any source about the diagnosis of bipolar in Patrick. Is that correct?
Objection asked and answered.
Correct.
In your mind, is there a difference between aggressive and assaultive behavior?
I don't believe so.
So when you say that there was assaultive behavior, what you're talking about is what you've described previously, Patrick waving his arms, clenching his fist, and yelling obscenities. Is that correct?
And approaching while he's doing that. That's where the aggression comes in.
My understanding, though, is that there was never anything closer than, I think you had a colorful term for it, gnat hair or something like that. He never touched you, in other words.
No, he touched the inside of my car while I was sitting in it.
Okay, well, I'm going to get to that in a second. Did he ever touch you physically?
No. Well, take it back. Elevator one time.
Pizza box?
Yes.
Did he touch you, or did he touch the pizza box?
Pizza box hit me.
Okay. So other than being hit by a pizza box, you've never had any physical contact from Patrick?
No.
When you came out of the elevator, were you moving forward?
Yes.
Okay. After Patrick, well, let me back up. Patrick was performing tasks at Park Plaza Towers in the fall of 2006, correct?
Mm-hmm.
He was getting paid for it, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And
Sorry.
he was taking instructions from whom?
Me.
Okay. Now, what is it about employment that you have a problem with in that scenario, in those givens?
Patrick, we were looking for somebody on a part-time basis while we were hiring a full-time person that had qualifications. We were looking for someone with either boilermaker experience or electrical experience. And we had put flyers out to the VA in Palo Alto and San Francisco. We were looking for somebody who was retired that had the knowledge of either being a machinist, boilermaker, or a electrician. And that's what we were looking for in the building.
And how much of that did you communicate to Patrick?
Since day one, that's what I communicated to him, along with Jim Quill, who was standing there with me.
All that information?
Yes. That this would be totally temporary. We needed him to change the garbage cans 3 times a day and twice a week vacuum the floors.
How did the board get the impression that he was going to be hired as a permanent employee?
He approached me and asked if he could apply for the job. And I said, you're more than welcome, help apply for the job. You know, so he went ahead and asked for an application, which I provided him, and he was going to apply for the job.
How did the question, though, was how did the board get the impression that he had been hired as an employee?
Objection calls for speculation.
The board was told by me that Patrick wanted to apply for the job.
That's all that you know of?
Yes.
Were you aware of the reports that people had given to the board about his performance?
Yes.
And they were all
During
good?
the meeting, yes.
Okay. When you saw the minutes of the report that said he was an employee, you then drafted an amendment to that, correct?
Correct.
Who wrote the original report?
I believe it was Norma Sauce.
When did you contact her about that?
I told
Change.
her that he's not an employee.
When did you tell her that?
After I read the minutes, about 2 weeks after she put it out to everybody.
Where was she? Was this a face-to-face conversation?
Yes.
Did she, what exactly do you recall saying to her?
I said he is not a full-time employee, and he is not an employee. He is a part-time helper that needed a job done, and that was to do the garbage. We could have hired a company to come in and do it while we were looking for somebody. But Patrick said he lost his job in the printing business and needed a job. And so since his grandmother lived there and I knew Verna very well, I said, okay, we'll give you a shot.
Were you the one that initiated the phone call when you saw the report, or did you go to her in person, or what?
Saw what report?
The original minutes with the statement that we've been talking about.
I approached her on that.
Physically in
Yes.
person? Okay. Was that the first thing you wanted to talk to her about?
No,
What was the first thing you wanted to talk to her about?
that we needed to go ahead and look for a replacement on the board because I was getting off. And we needed to also figure out who would be another replacement that we can ask to be on the board. My term was up in February.
David Beeling has been in for his deposition and testified very vehemently that he was not the building manager. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
What's your explanation for that?
Dave may have forgotten, but we hired him as the building manager, and not the maintenance building manager, but he would be the manager of Park Plaza Towers. He would do the books, he would do the paying of the bills, he would wind up collecting the bills and payments, and he would contract people to go ahead and do certain work with board approval. Everything had to be through board approval. You wanted to be an attorney, you had to show up with with your malpractice insurance policy, license that you're required to practice in the state of California, and he did all that for us.
But it's your conviction at this time that he forgot that he was the building manager.
Yes. That was the initial intention to hire Dave Beeling, because the other people were just our accountants. And Dave was more hands-on.
Steve Martin does a thing about I forgot. I don't know if you've seen it. It's quite humorous, but anyway. Did you know that he posts certain certifications on his website and represents himself as a certified manager when in fact he's not? Did you know that?
Objection, calls for speculation.
I've never seen his website.
Did he ever make any representations to you about having any certifications when you were considering him as the manager?
Bob Foster is the one that introduced Dave Beeling, who manages Friends Property, and that's how we came up with Dave Beeling at the time.
In portions of your testimony and in the massive amount of paperwork we've seen here, there have been a number of allegations about Patrick's behavior between the beginning of 2007 all the way into 2010 and 11 when you got your restraining orders. And again, taking all that into account, based on your experience and in your opinion, Patrick does not have any sort of mental disability. Is that your testimony today?
Yes. Do I believe he's angry?
Wait.
I mean, I'm not interrupting you, your attorney
Okay.
is, but
Go ahead.
Yeah, can we
Go
go
ahead.
off the record real quick? I need to have a chat with Joe. Okay?
Whispered in the ear.
No.
Okay, we are off the record at 2:06 p.m. Okay, we are back on the record at 2:07 p.m.
it's, what is it, May 12th, 2014. And at this time, in this place, if Patrick McErlane were sitting next to me, is it your position that you'd feel threatened?
Objection, argumentative.
Answer.
Do I answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
If he's in this room, my blood pressure would go up. That's all I can describe to you. It literally would go up. And I would have to take a nitro just to bring it down.
At some point, there was an accusation that Patrick had put a package in the trash chute. You remember this?
Yes.
What led you to make that claim?
The Utterbacks told me.
What did they tell you?
They said that they saw Patrick coming out of the mailroom and throw something down the chute. And they went downstairs, went through the garbage can, and it was laying on the very top. And it was a package addressed to Oma and Opa at 110 Park Road, number 308. And Oma and Opa means Grandma and Grandpa. And that was during Christmas.
And that's who's Grandma and Grandpa?
I'm Opa and Cynthia's Oma in Dutch.
Did you get the package back?
Yes,
Okay. Did Patrick ever deliver packages to you after he was dismissed?
never,
Did he ever do it before?
never.
Do you know Judge Lanham?
Yes.
Did you ever encounter, could you tell us how you knew him?
I knew him when he moved into the condominium complex.
When was that?
That was like in 2004.
Did he ever express anything to you prior to the time when Patrick was terminated? Well, I'm going to use the word terminated. I'm not trying to be irritating, but at the time, prior to the time that Patrick was terminated, that's December, the end of the, or 1st of January of 2007, had you had any conversations with Judge Lanham about Patrick
Prior to 2007, no.
prior to the time he was let go or stopped working?
No.
Did you ever have any conversations with him after that
Yes.
about Patrick?
Yes.
What was the occasion to have that conversation?
Patrick's dog had dropped the number in front of Judge Lanham's door. When Judge Lanham came out, Patrick was walking away with the dog, and he called Patrick to come back and clean it up, at which point Patrick got into an altercation, which I heard down in my unit. I then opened up the door and started listening while he was berating Judge Lanham.
What's Judge Lanham's unit at that time?
Judge Lanham unit, I need that little,
Oh, the parking lot thing?
no, this has got the units on there too.
But it's this?
Yeah, okay, so Judge Lanham,
Let the record reflect that the witness is looking at SCHREURS documents 1 and 2.
these things are tough to read.
You know, but that's something
Yes.
I don't need. Was it the
Yeah.
same floor as Patrick's
It's the same
floor?
floor as Patrick's. Judge Lanham is right next to the garbage chute. I'm down the hall. So Judge Lanham would be here, let's see,
Doesn't do us any good to
Yeah.
have you pointing. That's okay.
yeah, Judge Lanham would be 1, 2, 3 doors away from Patrick, 4 doors away from me.
You heard the altercation, you came out and you saw the altercation, is that
I
correct?
didn't see the altercation, I just heard it. And when I opened my door, and then I saw Patrick started to come around the corner dragging his dog, and I closed my door.
Do you remember when that was?
No, I don't.
Do you have any idea? What year?
It had to be in 2010.
Was it prior to your application for the restraining order?
It was after.
Did I understand that to be the first contact you'd had with him about about Patrick?
Yes.
Did he give you any advice on the temporary restraining orders?
He told me that we should, call the police if we had a problem. He said he doesn't have a restraining order. but he said he was going to call. Whether that he did or didn't, I'm not sure.
He was going to, when you say call, I mean the police?
Yes, because Patrick was in his face about this dog.
About the dog incident?
Yes.
And that was before or after you applied for a TRO?
Right, I had the TRO at the time.
Okay, so it was after. All right. Did you talk to Judge Lanham after that about temporary restraining orders?
I did never talk to Lanham regarding temporary restraining orders. He knew we had one.
There was a time when a group of people went down to get restraining orders, correct?
Correct.
Did you know that was going to happen in advance?
Yes.
Did you go to court with these people?
Yes, as a witness.
Prior to that event, had you met with anyone regarding appearing as a witness?
Yes.
What meetings, the general question I'm going to ask is, could you describe what type of activity occurred? I don't know, so I'm not trying to trick you. I just want to know what happened prior to going to get those restraining orders with regard to the other people that applied.
I know Norma Berenger Sauls was being screamed at by Patrick in the garage. All this, by the way, is always taken care of in the garage. It always happens in the garage. Occasionally it happens somewhere else, but 99% in the garage. And so the incident was just loud screaming, and all Norma kept saying is, "Come on, you're just crazy, you know," and started walking away, and he's just screaming after her. And so I guess she had enough. The other one was the caregiver. I was over walking towards the garage door to get in, and Patrick's yelling at Norma's caregiver, telling her, "I'll give you $100, you just leave here right now and I'll take care of Norma." And so she felt threatened. And I don't know if it's the same caregiver that got the restraining order after we got our second restraining order.
Which Norma was this? Just
Norma Berenger Sauls.
Berliner?
Berliner, yeah.
Berliner Sauls.
And was that the same Norma that said, "You're crazy, you're just crazy"?
Yes,
Okay, and that was all one incident?
yeah. And of course she's telling him to stay away from me, don't come near me, just stay away. And of course then that eggs him to move closer and closer.
Was the caregiver there at that time?
No,
So, well, I'm sorry, I get the feeling there was another incident about a caregiver.
right.
So
The
that was-
caregiver was separate by herself.
Okay, one of the things that happens in these question and answer sessions is things get a little blurred.
Yeah,
There's a first incident where Norma, and it's Norma Berliner Sauls that says you're just crazy,
yes,
and that's an incident where they're having a shouting match or something of
Yes.
that nature. And then there's another incident where Patrick says to the caregiver, "Why don't you leave? I'll give you money,
Right.
and I'll take care of her." Okay.
right.
About when did that happen?
Shortly after that incident, and I'm going to say it was 2010,
Did you have a restraining order at that time?
yes,
And you actually heard these two incidents?
yes.
And it's your testimony that this is a person with an anger management problem?
Yes,
Referring to Patrick?
yes.
Okay. What was the next thing that occurred with regard to this group of people that obtained restraining orders that you recall?
Julie Robles, I was a witness to at least 3 instances with her. One was we were both waiting for the elevator, and he came in and refused to go ahead and get out of the elevator and proceeded to flip her off, as well as me.
Can you elaborate on refused to get out, please?
Well, he got off on the first floor. He was going to get out, and he had his dog with him, and then hit the button to go down to the first floor. And we were going to get on to go down to the basement. I mean, we were on the first floor. He went, hit the elevator to go back down to the first floor,
So where had he come from?
the basement.
He came from the garage, came up, the
Came
door
out.
opens, you're standing there, and
Right.
he won't get out, he doesn't get out.
Doesn't get out and goes back down to the basement. But he didn't see me. He saw Julie Robles.
How do you know he didn't see you?
Because I was on the other side. The elevator doors are situated like this. And so if this one opens up, if I'm standing over here, he can't see me. And I was going up the elevator. So when this one opened up, I would have just hopped on this one to go up if it opened up the doors. She was going down to her car. And then he started swearing at her, and then I saw, he started to move out, and then he saw me, and then he started screaming and went back downstairs.
But that would be the appropriate thing for him to do in terms of his movement. He was supposed to stay away from you, right?
Right.
Okay. When was this incident?
I do have a good memory on little details on that, but the dates, it was all after our restraining order. So it was, and before they got theirs, I think they got theirs in 2011. So it had to be just before 2011. Because then he started attacking other board members.
Okay, let's
So
Yeah,
slow down a little.
I know,
Let's-
I'm just looking at the date time frame.
I understand.
So,
There'll be an objection if you start wandering off. We just want, and doing a narrative, because
Right.
your counsel doesn't want you to do that. But I do want you to try to describe the events that you're aware of that led to this group getting together and showing up at the courthouse together.
right.
Okay. So Julie Robles was the next thing. If it's not too general, we'll refer to that as the Julie Robles elevator incident. And that, did you say there were more than one of that incident?
Yeah. There was one that he was in his car. Julie's got groceries. She's going into the elevator, had to unlock the door. He gets out of the car, and I believe he had like an iPod with him or something that looked like a camera. Normally he has, a regular camera, but this time he had some kind of an iPod thing and was aiming it at her, and she yelled at him to stay away from her. And I was over by my car, and I started coming over, and as soon as he saw me, he backed away from her, and then he went back over to his car.
Again, that's what he was supposed to do under the restraining order.
Right.
Right. You mentioned earlier about your car, and I didn't want to leave that out. You were down at the donut store,
Yes.
and Patrick approached you at your car when you were in the car, right? You
Right.
say he touched the car.
Yes.
What was he asking you to do at that point? Or what was his, strike that. Tell us what happened.
I pulled.
Objection calls for narrative.
Well, tell us what happened. Anyway.
Okay. I pulled out of 110 Park, in which he proceeded to skate his skateboard in front of my car. And so I slammed on the brakes, and he was just turning around going, "Hey, motherfucker, fuck you, motherfucker." And then I hit the garage door button. It opened up. I shot out the garage as he was running up the stairs, made a right going north on Park, made a right turn on Howard and a left on California Drive, and I went over to get a cup of coffee. Never saw him after that. He must have gone straight across up Burlingame Avenue and then was right there by the donuts. When I came out of the donut place, he was standing right in front of my car. I got in the car and I put the coffee down, the donuts that I bought, and he was just screaming, "It's my cart," and whatever that has to do with anything. You fired me, you motherfucker. You owe me money. I'm going to sue your ass. You owe me, you motherfucking asshole. And then I just went like this, started to roll up the window, and he lunges in towards the car. And there's a witness.
Did he say anything
It's in the
about?
paperwork.
Did he say anything about? Where's my letter of termination?
Nope.
Has he ever asked you for a letter of termination?
Nope.
To your knowledge, has he asked anyone for a letter of termination?
No.
To your knowledge, has he asked anyone to document his termination?
No. If he's asked one of the board members, while I was not there,
No, I understand. I asked you
That's
if you
fine.
knew.
I don't.
And did he? Okay, well, that does. I'm sorry. I back up. No one has ever told you that he asked for some letter of termination or indicia of his termination.
No.
That's a double negative, but I'll let it ride. Have you ever understood that he wanted some documentation for his termination?
No.
When he first was employed, you said that he had been fired from his job.
That's what he said.
Did you ever contact his prior employer?
No. He did give me a number.
Let's allow Skip to
Go
ask a
ahead.
question.
Did he give you a number?
Yeah, gave me a number. Never called him.
Do you know who the employer was?
No.
Do you know what the line of work he was in?
Printing.
Do you know what his job was at the printing company?
Printing?
Well, there's different things you can do printing.
Yeah. But he says everybody's doing their own printing now. They're doing their own, letterhead. The business is getting obsolete. They had to cut people. So he was cut.
During the time that he was working at the building, did you have any criticism of his performance?
A couple of things.
Tell us about that.
We had one lady that, Irma Perry, she had a flood and caused some damage to her unit. And we said, okay, we'll contact the insurance company. They'll get a crew over here with dryers, and they'll wet vac everything and get everything going. And that's perfectly, good. So let's get her to call, and they'll come over and take care of it. I was more concerned about the people down below whose water heater didn't break, but all the water goes downhill. And so there was a puddle in the garage, and I know the person on the first floor, Mrs. Finnegan, definitely had water in her unit and hardwood floors, which had to be replaced because they all buckled. Where I told Patrick that what he couldn't do is he started going ahead and doing work for Irma by rolling up the carpets for her, taking the carpets over to, I guess it's called, not Beeling. There's another company that does carpet cleaning there on South Amplet, and it's Persian carpets that they clean and resew and do all this other stuff too. So he was taking it over there for her, then picking them up and installing them, and we weren't paying him for that. And the idea is you could work in somebody else's unit, but you have to charge them for that. And when you charge them for that, you don't charge us. And so I had to get that straight with him, and that was like about 6 weeks into, his working there. So I said, you have to go ahead and do it on your time, and we're paying you to do the garbage, the vacuuming, and any other thing that I may need you to do. But if it goes in somebody's unit, then the insurance company and they are responsible for it. And if you spend time in there, you can charge them for it, but you can't charge us time.
Now, what was the cause of the flood?
She broke her water heater.
What does that mean?
The water heater broke. You ever had one do that?
Well, you said she broke her water heater. I
Yeah,
don't know what
she
you mean by that.
somehow, when she had set something in there that hit the water heater, that put a dent into it, that started rusting, and it started shooting out the side.
Okay. Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was looking for something a little more negative than that. Did he ever do anything that was? That sounds like he did something extra and was confusing the accounting for it. Fair
Right.
statement?
Right.
Anything else that was like negative?
Other than he had another place, the first floor manager's unit was being painted, and he came in and he kicked out the painter and told him he wasn't doing a good job, and it wasn't his position to kick the person out. And they said, well, it had a bunch of little molly curls in the paint and stuff, and so he kicked him out, and that's not part of his job, is to wind up kicking somebody out that we've hired to go in and paint it.
Did he tell you that he'd painted it before?
No, he never painted it.
Okay.
And so,
So it's your testimony. Now, how do you know he never painted it?
because I was in the building every day, and we hired this guy to paint it, so I know Patrick wasn't in there, and he wasn't living in there.
Did he have a key to it?
Yes.
Do you know what proving a negative means? How do you know he wasn't in there? You weren't, strike that, never mind. So
No.
he had access to the unit.
Yes.
You're just saying you never saw him painting in there.
Right. He had access to put his lunch in there. If he had anything for lunch, he could put it in there and had a fridge.
I'm sorry, we don't have a lot of time, and I appreciate that. He had access to it, and you're saying he had permission to do certain things, but he didn't have permission to go paint it, is what you're
Right.
saying. Okay.
Right.
But you don't really, never mind. You indicated in your prior testimony that when you hired him, you checked with the board.
Correct.
Who did you check with?
Bob Fossner, Gene Gish, Mary Janey, Claire Coleman, and Gail Galligan.
You positive about that?
Yes.
All those people you contacted.
Yes.
Did you tell each of them that this was a temporary hire?
Yes.
Earlier in your testimony, you indicated that Patrick was going to be an employee of Beeling Management. Is that correct?
Correct.
That was what you intended as the president of the board, correct?
That's
Did-
what Bob Fossner recommended.
So who was paying him during this interim period?
We were.
Is it your understanding that Beeling was the one who terminated Patrick or stopped the relationship?
No, Patrick just walked out.
But it was a meeting with Beeling that resulted in that
And him walking
separation.
out. Yes.
Not you is what I'm getting at.
No.
First you heard of it, you were talking to Nancy on the phone, and Patrick came and gave you the keys.
Yeah.
prior to that time, Patrick had provided some documents, and on those documents, you realized that there was a felony, but you believed it was a DUI because that's what Patrick told you, right?
Yes.
Objection may mistake prior testimony belated.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make it clear in my own mind.
Same objection.
Prior to that, because I was confused in your subsequent testimony because you said the felony had something to do with your decision to fire Patrick, or the decision to let Patrick go.
That was, no.
If you knew about it beforehand, it's just a logical proposition. Then it didn't have anything to do with the termination or the separation,
Sure.
correct?
Correct.
You said you have a computer at your office that you use, right?
Yes.
And your wife has a computer.
Yes.
Are there any other computers that you use for email?
No.
Do you have one of those iPhones that you can use for email now?
I have one now.
When did you start using that?
My son gave it to me in 2000, I'm going to say 10.
When did you start using that for emails?
It's only for emails to family and stuff. It's limited. It's through the U.S. military.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
package plan.
Okay.
And so the email address is omaandopa@gmail.com. And so that is more for family to email stuff, and it's really difficult to work.
But you're saying you can't get emails from outside the family?
I can't.
And
No.
you can't send it?
Unless you send it to that email address.
Does that family include Cynthia then, right?
Yes.
Other than that, are there any other machines that you can get email on besides the two computers we've mentioned?
One at home, which also has the OMA email address.
Is that different from Cynthia's?
That's a Dell, yeah. That we just bought a year ago. That's different than Cynthia's.
Okay. I noticed you remembered a little bit more about the people that were on the board initially than you did at the very beginning of the deposition because you've been thinking about it, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall anything more about why the beginning of these emails might not be on these documents that were produced today?
Because I rarely produced a lot of emails unless I sent something to the board. And if I sent something to the board, it would wind up going to the board.
I'm not sure I understand.
I used the NetWiz one. That was mine on my computer. Sometimes I would wind up, if the secretary was gone, and I had this antiquated old system. So if I needed to go, it didn't even have spell check or anything. So if the paralegal wasn't there, I would go ahead and I'd use her computer and I would jam out some email. It would have Cynthia on there, but I would always sign my name.
I'm sorry, I was referring to, there's some here that don't have the headers on them. You know, the beginning of the email we start with kind of looks like we're going in the middle of the email.
Yeah, I don't know why there's
Okay.
portions mixed up, but those aren't the ones that we turned in. Then it might be in that stack of paperwork,
Okay.
the whole completed one.
There's some testimony about passing out flyers, that Beeling asked Pat to pass out flyers.
Right.
What's your understanding of what happened?
Patrick got very upset, threw him back at Dave Beeling and told him to deliver him his damn self, that he's not, his whipping boy to do that.
Do you have any evidence to suggest Patrick did not deliver those, other than your conversation with Beeling?
That was from Patrick that I had the conversation with,
Okay.
not Dave Beeling. And I'm assuming either Patrick or Dave Beeling delivered those and I don't know which one did.
So Patrick could have delivered them and just told you that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the previous manager used to deliver those all the time, including all board minutes.
We were going through the listing of incidents that you observed prior to the group going to get their temporary restraining orders. Do you recall any conversations with people organizing those restraining orders? In other words, suggesting a meeting or getting together to make sure there's an attorney that's hired to do it, that type of thing?
I don't have any recollection of getting together with a meeting regarding the restraining orders. I do know that the Berensteins had her sister-in-law, who is an attorney, go ahead and do it for free for the for those 8 people.
Who did you hear that from, that it would be for free?
I heard that from husband just died. Garcia.
Hernandez?
No, Garcia. Tony and Bev Garcia. Benton?
I have no idea.
Benton.
Were you ever present at any interviews where these orders, strike that, were you ever present when any of these petitions were drafted?
No.
Did you know the date when they were to be requested from the court?
Yes.
And did you go to that meeting?
Yes.
Was Judge Lanham with you?
Yes.
at the time? And what was his purpose in being there?
As he was witness to 3 incidents, and I was witness to Julie Robles and Norma.
My understanding is that there was an accommodation or a stipulation that occurred prior to the hearings. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And that occurred out in the hallway, is that right?
No, there was an extension filed by Ms. Pratt that basically read out something that they needed a 30-day extension because Patrick was going to move out and there might not be a need for the restraining orders.
Did Judge Lanham go into any of the courtrooms while he was there?
Yes.
Which one?
In the ones that everybody went in at the same time. I believe it was 8.
Okay. Did you see Judge Lanham speaking to any of the judges?
No. Spoke to a lot of people that were sitting back who shook hands with him and knew who he was.
Do you know if the court was in session when that occurred?
No.
It was not in session, or you don't know?
It was not in session at the time.
Okay. So at the time you were there, you did not see Judge Lanham make contact with any of the Superior Court judges
No.
at the courthouse?
None.
I understand he was to be a witness. Did you talk to him about the process at that time on that day?
No.
Did you speak to him at all?
Oh, yes. I sat there and spoke to him about his son, Joe, and how his practice is going and his real estate and mortgage lending. But that's as far as our conversations went.
That was his son's work you were talking about?
Yes.
Okay. He's retired, correct, Judge Lanham?
Yes. Also going blind, so that's not good.
Do you happen to know, I know you just mentioned that, do you know what his mental condition is right now?
He is on the verge of dementia.
And how do you know that?
I ran into the person who he was staying with, who moved in with him, and she had told me that he's not doing well, his eyesight's failing, and he keeps forgetting things, and the doctors say it's a form of dementia.
Have you noticed any change in Patrick's, let me strike that, let's do a little foundation. You live at the building today, correct?
Correct.
And you've lived there since
99.
99, uninterrupted, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sorry.
Keep doing that.
Have you noticed any change in Patrick's behavior with regard to the residents in the building since the beginning of 2012? That'd be 2 years ago.
He gets in his car and leaves.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Objection Vegas to time.
When does he leave?
He leaves 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock, and he doesn't come back. I get back at 5 and he's not there.
So you're still leaving at 7:30 and coming back at 5?
Yeah.
Okay. So with regard to
7:30 he's there. My wife leaves around 8, and sometimes his car's gone, sometimes it isn't.
And again, question is, have you noticed any change in his behavior since the beginning of 2012?
Objection Vegas to time.
I don't understand.
Beginning, when is beginning? January 1st,
January.
2012?
Yeah, January 2012.
He still has that leer he gives me from when he knows he's 25 yards away, where he'll stand there with his dog. By the way, it's a lovely dog. We'll stand there and just like this. Come on.
Does it say, come on?
Yeah, it doesn't say fuck you. It just says, come on. So that's...
How often does that happen?
It happened about 2 months ago, and it hasn't happened since.
What
It
was
was
it?
the one time we were over by Carl McClellan building, and he was across the street at in front of a restaurant, directly across the street from us. But there was no flipping off. There was no, fuck you. There wasn't any of that.
Would you say that's a change?
Yeah, it's a change, yes.
So prior to, the reason I'm asking, so do you know anything about the medical history of Patrick in the last 3 years as far as his treatment?
No.
When was the last incident prior to the incident in front of Carl McClellan?
The last incident was in 2012, around the 21st, when we served him, or we served you, with papers. I was driving down the street, coming onto Bayswater from California Drive, and heading west, and he was at the corner, and he had his window down, and he rolled his window down, and he says, "I'm going to get you, you motherfucker."
Is that September?
That's September
21st, 2012?
21st, 2012. We got a restraining order on the 26th.
And the incident prior to that?
Incident prior to that was 2 days prior to that. And that happened when we were at going for a walk down Bayswater, and as soon as we turned left on Lorton Avenue and check out the new candy store, and just as we were walking across the street, he came around and he just said, "Oh, fuck you, assholes, fuck you," and kept going and kept yelling "fuck you" as he's crossing the street.
Do you feel threatened by that?
Yeah, and anytime somebody starts doing that to you, gives you a little bit of a watchful eye.
How about the leer across the street? Did you feel threatened by that?
No, that one I didn't feel too threatened because there was other people around us.
You made a report at one time about him parking his mother's car in a space in the garage, in space 104, right? Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel threatened by that act?
No.
Why did you report it?
He cannot use space 104, period.
Did that seem... strike that.
See, and I don't think it was his mother's car.
Whose car do you think it was?
His. Because
How
he
do
had
you-
two of them.
Why do you think that?
Because he had two of those cars.
What cars?
They had the, what do they call them, the Toyotas, or whatever they are. They have two.
I don't
Let's
know.
let Skip ask
Okay.
a question
Okay.
and let you
So
respond.
the question is, why do you think it was Patrick's car?
I don't know.
Okay.
Did it turn out to be Patrick's?
It's terribly tempting to get into a conversation, but your attorney will tell you not to do that. So in the past 2 years, there was an incident at the corner, and there was an incident out at Bayswater. And I'm being very generic here, but and then there was a 25-yard leer. Has anything happened at the premises since January of 2012?
3 weeks ago, I came out of my unit. He came out of the elevator. I was walking towards the elevators, and he refused to move for me. And I had to move over to the side, and he was within 2 feet of me. And that's a violation of the restraining order. And I wasn't about to spend 4 hours waiting for the police.
But you are going to tell me why it was a violation of the restraining order. Why?
He can't be within 5 feet of me.
Does the restraining order say anything about meeting in the hallway?
Yep, 5 feet.
What does it say?
Says he may not be within 5 feet of my distance, of my
So if you-
person.
So if you stand in the elevator, he can't get out of the building. Is that fair?
Do you
I mean,
s-
is that a fair
do
statement?
you- I would move over, and I have. I would move over to the side so he can get out. But when I'm coming in, he's walking out of the elevator, he's not giving up his territory, along with his dog. So I moved over against the wall, and then they came walking by.
The Judge Bergeron said, I think, in the hearing that you were to permit each other to pass each other in the hallways, correct?
As long as he was 5 feet from my distance.
How wide are the hallways?
6 feet.
What's your understanding of what Judge Bergeron was saying when he said you were to pass each other in the hallway?
This isn't a mutual thing here.
Well, it was at one time, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. Never. Including
How is
John.
Patrick supposed to enter and exit the building if you're standing in the hallway?
He can, if I saw him coming out of the elevator, I would move to the side. If I can't move to the side without him passing within 5 feet of me, okay, then I'm trapped. So he could wait until I walk up and go into the elevator, and then he can go. That's the elevator door to where the garbage chute is about 10 feet. He could have just backed up a few feet and waited. And then I would have gotten on the elevator and he could go his merry way.
And how threatened did you feel in this encounter?
None. Also didn't call the police.
Any other incidents that you recall since January of 2012?
No.
When I say don't recall, that unfortunately, you only bring your memory here, as Ms. Pratt pointed out, so we can't probe beyond what your memory might be, but recollection's interesting because there are many ways you can reflect on your memory. One is it didn't happen, so I can't remember it. Another one is it might have happened, but I can't recall. Are there what are you saying when you say there's no incidents since January of 2012, that you can't recall them and there might be some incidents, or that there aren't any?
I can't recall that there were any other incidences.
Okay.
Sir, I have 5 minutes left on this.
Thank you. Were you aware of Patrick's efforts to run for office on the board?
Yes.
How did you become aware of those?
Yeah, I received a notice from Dave Beeling that he was running for the board.
Did you do anything in response to that advice?
No.
Did you ever see anything that he posted with regard to running for the board in the building?
Downstairs in the mailroom, he had posted that he was running for the board. I have pictures of those in there somewhere.
Anything else?
No.
When you determined that they were going to have a background check, drug testing, and credit check on Patrick, was that your concept or was it Fosner's?
That was Fosner's.
Do you know if, so at that time you were no longer the president, or you still were?
When he presented this, I was still the president.
Okay. Did you obtain any advice as to the legality of demanding a drug test from an employee or a prospective employee?
Well, that's where we leave it up to Dave Beeling, who said that he does this on a periodic basis, so he knew what he had to do to get that done. I said, fine.
Did you take that advice on the basis that he was the manager of the building?
Yes.
He's claiming he's a consultant and that he wasn't the manager. Is that your understanding?
He is the Park Plaza manager for the building. Okay, he is not the maintenance manager for the building. So after I left, when they may have changed his title or may have changed situations, I don't know.
Okay.
I was not aware of any of that.
But as president of the association at the time, when Beeling told you that he was able to give you the proper way to do this, you accepted that as advice you should follow?
Yes.
Because he was acting as a manager and that was within the scope of his responsibility to provide that direction, correct?
Right.
Okay. With regard to handling persons who have disabilities, handicaps, that sort of thing at the building, as president, when you were president, what training did you receive on handling those issues?
I had training in other areas that was related to that.
Like what?
At the hospital, where Balboa, where I went, we had plenty of people in wheelchairs, amputees, blind. You make exceptions for them, and you try to get them to learn certain things. We do have handicapped people in the building. I have 2 children who are mentally disabled, so I know everything about handicap. My wife and I sued San Mateo Union High School District and won. And this was no, but this was to the point that we are very aware of all the rules and the laws related to handicaps. We live with a handicapped son, so we're aware of it. And so, do I think Patrick's handicap? He doesn't reflect that. He reflects anger. Okay, and he may have bipolar, he may have something, but neither Nancy nor Patrick or anybody ever brought up bipolar in any court action, in any police report, in any filings, in anything until you showed up. And then all of a sudden, he's bipolar. And that's his excuse? I don't think so. That's the first we heard of it.
Right. So, but as I'm taking from that you think that I decided he was bipolar. Did I do that?
I have no idea. You're the one who brought it up.
When I asked you about the issues of this case in the very beginning, that's kind of what I was getting at. You have actually been involved with mentally disabled children of yours in litigation.
Objection.
Is that true?
Objection made.
Didn't you just say that? What's the objection?
Misstates prior testimony.
Okay,
argumentative.
How'd I misstate it?
I think you pretty well said it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And throughout this 2007 to 2014 history at Park Plaza Towers, it's your testimony today that you don't perceive any mental disability in Patrick.
I don't see any. I see anger and lunging out at people, not just me, lunging out at mostly the board.
And let me ask it this way, does that seem normal to you?
You know, I don't know what drugs he's on. I don't know what medication he's taking or what he's smoking or what he's drinking.
Okay, now I begin to see what you're doing.
And I don't know.
I didn't understand before, now
Okay.
I'm beginning to get it. Okay.
And I don't know what exactly is causing this guy to go to his car and then just lose it.
Okay. But would you be prepared to accept a medical diagnosis that he's bipolar? Is it consistent with your experience with him?
Objection calls for expert opinion.
No.
Argumentative.
It doesn't.
I don't know. I'd have to look at it.
Sorry, they changed this.
Okay, time for a break.
Yeah.
Okay, we are off the record at 3:01 p.m. This marks the end of media number 2.